Josh Parker was used to seeing the world as a series of transactions. A millionaire since he could remember, heir to the Parker Resorts chain. He was now facing what should have been just another challenge in his business life. Buying the last plot of land in Napa Valley needed to complete a new and luxurious family resort. The plan was almost perfect. Almost. In the middle of the area designated for the resort complex, there was a small vineyard, the only property he hadn't managed to acquire yet. The land was in the name of an elderly man named William Thompson, owner of a small artisanal winery that Josh had barely heard of. It shouldn't be difficult to negotiate with an old man, he thought. The rest of the land had been easily purchased, but this particular plot, right in the center of the project, was holding up the expansion. Arriving in the small town near the vineyard, Josh felt the contrast to his usual life. Instead of glass towers and large offices, he found himself surrounded by small shops, people walking leisurely along the streets and the scent of the countryside in the air. He stopped by a local cafe to grab a quick espresso before heading to the vineyard. As he approached the counter, an accident happened. Trying to pull his phone from his suit pocket, he bumped into a coffee cup being delivered to the table beside him. The hot liquid spilled straight onto a woman who, until that moment, had been sitting quietly reading a book. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Josh said, horrified, as he realized the mess he'd made. The coffee ran down her white shirt, staining the fabric in a disastrous way. The woman, surprisingly calm, looked at him and, with a slight smile, spoke in an ironic tone. "Well, I've heard the coffee here is strong, but this is a bit much, don't you think?" She grabbed a few napkins and began to clean herself up, not seeming too upset. "Seriously, I'm so sorry. Let me pay for a new shirt or for a new coffee or whatever you want." Josh, usually confident and assured, felt completely out of place in that situation. It was rare for him to make a blunder, especially in front of someone who didn't seem the least bit intimidated. "Relax. It was about time to get rid of this old shirt anyway." She winked and smiled slightly, clearly finding the situation amusing. Josh, still a bit unsettled, introduced himself. "I'm Josh Parker. I'm in town for work. Don't know the place very well." The woman looked at him for a few seconds, as if considering something, before responding, "Mia, I'm from here." She said just that, and with one last smile, got up to leave. "Let me at least buy you another coffee. It's the least I can do after." Josh pointed at the coffee-soaked shirt, trying to make amends somehow. "Maybe another day," Mia replied mysteriously, as she grabbed her bag and walked out the door, leaving Josh with the impression that the interaction had been more interesting than he'd expected. Still confused, but without time to waste, Josh finished his coffee and headed to meet William Thompson, the elderly owner of the property he needed to acquire. Upon arriving at the vineyard's entrance, he was greeted by the familiar scent of grapes and the beautiful scenery of vine-covered hills. At the main house of the property, he rang the doorbell and waited. To his surprise, the person who answered wasn't old William Thompson, but Mia, the same woman from the cafe, now dressed casually but with an air of authority and ownership, looked at him with a mix of surprise and amusement. "You!" Josh exclaimed, stunned, pointing at her. "What are you doing here?" Mia crossed her arms and tilted her head, clearly enjoying his shock. "I should ask you the same thing. Are you lost?" Josh stood silent for a moment, trying to piece things together. He looked around, confused, until he asked, I'm here to speak with Mr. William Thompson. This vineyard belongs to him, right?" Mia's eyes filled with tears before she answered. "The vineyard is still in my grandfather's name. Yes, but I'm the one running everything now. I own it. Unfortunately, he passed away. It's just me now." Shock spread across Josh's face. He hadn't expected this. In his mind, he was prepared to deal with an elderly man, maybe someone easy to convince to sell the land. But now he found himself facing Mia, the same woman he had spilled coffee on just minutes ago, who now turned out to be the key to the project's success. Josh, still trying to process the situation, took a deep breath. "So, "You're the person I need to speak with about selling the vineyard." Mia nodded slightly, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "I guess so. But if you're here to talk about selling this land, I can tell you right now, I'm not interested." Josh felt the weight of her words and knew, at that moment, that this negotiation would be much more difficult than he had imagined. Josh stood there, trying to process the unexpected turn of events. He had mentally prepared himself to negotiate with a traditional elderly man, not a determined woman who, apparently, already had her answer ready. Mia, with a relaxed posture, watched his reactions. For her, it was almost entertaining to see his discomfort grow. "I think you might want to come in," Mia suggested, politely gesturing as she opened the door wider. Josh entered, still a bit dazed. The house was simple but full of history. The walls were adorned with old photos of the vineyard, and everything seemed steeped in generations of memories. It was the kind of place that breathed tradition, something Josh had always ignored in his countless acquisitions. He usually saw land and properties as mere financial assets, but here, there was something more, something he didn't yet understand. "Take a seat, I'll be right back," Mia said, walking to the kitchen. Josh sat down, still trying to reorganize his thoughts. He needed to think about how to approach her effectively, but everything about this place threw him off balance. When Mia returned, she brought a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I imagine you're used to negotiating in boardrooms, with ties and contracts. But here, things are different," she said, opening the bottle with impressive ease and pouring 2 glasses. "This is the wine my family has been making for decades. If you want to understand why I won't sell, you'll have to start by understanding this." Josh took the glass, somewhat reluctant but curious. He wasn't exactly a wine connoisseur, but he knew how to recognize quality. As he brought the wine to his lips, he immediately noticed the richness of flavors. It was full-bodied, with notes of ripe fruit and a lightness that went down smoothly. He looked at Mia, who was watching him closely, as if waiting for his reaction. "It's good," Josh admitted, still a bit hesitant. "Good." Mia arched an eyebrow. "This wine has won regional awards, you know?" Josh laughed awkwardly. He was clearly out of his depth, and Mia seemed to know exactly how to handle him. The silence between them lasted a few seconds until Josh finally broke the ice. "Look, Mia, I know you have an emotional connection to this land, but I'm here because this land is the last piece missing from my family's expansion project. All the surrounding land has already been bought. The new resort will bring jobs, tourism, investment to the region. I think you could consider the offer." Mia rested her elbows on the table and leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his. "And I ask you, Josh, what's worth more to you, a new resort, or preserving the history and legacy of a family that built all this with their own hands?" She pointed to the window, which overlooked the vineyards. "I could sell and maybe even make a lot of money, but do you understand what that would mean to me? This isn't just land. It's not just a vineyard. This property is the only thing left of my family. It's where I grew up, where I learned about life, about the strength it takes to keep something alive with effort and love. Do you really think I can give that up?" Mia's words hit Josh in a way he hadn't expected. He had been through many negotiations in his life, but never had he met someone who spoke with so much conviction and passion. It made him uncomfortable but also intrigued. "I understand this is important to you, but maybe there's a way to find common ground," Josh said, trying to stay diplomatic. "We could make a partnership, perhaps? Preserve the vineyard as part of the resort, ensure that its history continues, but also allow for the region's development." Mia shook her head slowly. "You still don't get it," she sighed. "This isn't about being part of something bigger. I don't want to be a small attraction in a resort. I want this vineyard to remain exactly what it has always been, authentic, independent, alive. It doesn't make sense to me to hand it over to a corporation that only sees numbers and profits." Josh took a deep breath. He couldn't deny the strength of Mia's passion, but he was there to complete a mission. His family, especially his father, Richard, expected him to come back with a signed contract, and quickly. There were millions of dollars at stake, and time was running out. He knew it would be impossible to convince his father that the purchase would be delayed or complicated. "My father won't take no for an answer," Josh murmured more to himself, but Mia heard. "Oh, is that it?" Mia crossed her arms. "You're here because of your father, aren't you? Doing what he told you, following orders." Those words echoed in a way Josh hadn't expected. For years, he had followed the path his father had laid out, inheriting responsibilities, making decisions that brought him closer and closer to the family empire. But there, sitting at that simple table, with a glass of wine in his hand, he began to wonder if he was really doing what he wanted or just following a plan that no longer made sense. "It's not just that." Josh began to respond, but Mia interrupted. "Well, when you figure out what you really want, maybe we can continue this conversation. But for now, the answer is no." Josh remained silent, seeing the determination in her eyes. He knew this wouldn't be an easy negotiation, but something inside him had also changed. And that battle, somehow, felt like it was just beginning. Josh left the vineyard with the weight of the conversation hammering in his mind. He had thought it would be a simple negotiation, like so many others, but this woman, with her firmness and passion, had awakened something in him. As he drove back to town, his thoughts were disordered. He needed to think of a new plan, a new approach. Mia wouldn't be convinced just with money. When he got to the hotel, a call from his father was already waiting for him. Josh hesitated before answering, knowing that this conversation would add more pressure on him. "Josh, how's the negotiation going?" Richard Parker's deep voice reverberated with authority on the other end of the line. "It's complicated," Josh answered honestly as he lay down on the bed. "The vineyard owner isn't willing to sell. She's very connected to the land, to her family's history." "Connected? That's not our problem. Everyone has a price, you know that. We've bought all the surrounding land. This is just one more. Double the offer if necessary. But I want that contract signed by the end of the week." Josh sighed, feeling the weight of his father's expectations. To Richard, everything was about business, numbers, and results. Emotions, family histories, connections to the land, all of that was irrelevant. But now, Josh saw that this wasn't a usual case. Mia wasn't just protecting a piece of land. She was defending her legacy, her life. "Dad, it's not that simple," Josh tried to explain. "She's not interested in the money. Her grandfather started this vineyard. And to her, selling it would be like betraying her own family's history." Richard let out a sarcastic laugh. "History? Josh, we're talking about business. It doesn't matter if the land has been passed down for 10 generations. It's irrelevant. If she doesn't want to sell, make her want to. Convince her it's the best thing she could do. Or find another way to secure that land." Josh fell silent. His father's last words sounded like a veiled threat, which deeply bothered him. Richard Parker was not the kind of man who accepted no as an answer, and Josh knew he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. "I'll try again," Josh replied, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Don't try, Josh. Do it," Richard said firmly before abruptly hanging up. The silence that followed the call was suffocating. Josh stared at the ceiling, feeling trapped between two forces. On one side, his father's overwhelming expectations and the weight of the family empire. On the other, Mia's unwavering conviction, which somehow was starting to affect him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The next day, Josh decided he needed to change his strategy. He went to the vineyard once again, but this time it wasn't to talk business directly. He needed to understand Mia and her world before trying anything else. When he arrived at the property, he found Mia supervising workers in the vineyard. She looked at ease, wearing a straw hat and simple clothes, completely different from the woman he had met in the cafe. "Here for another attempt?" Mia asked without looking at him, as she watched the vines. "Actually, I came to understand," Josh replied, approaching slowly. "I know I came here as an investor trying to make a deal, but now I just want to understand why all of this is so important to you." I want to know what's so special about this land. Mia finally turned to him, evaluating him with her gaze. She was skeptical, but there was something in Josh's tone that seemed sincere. He didn't seem like the typical millionaire who only saw figures. There was a tiredness in his eyes, as if this negotiation was also affecting him in some way. "Do you really want to know?" she asked, with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Josh nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on hers. "Then come with me," she said, as she began walking toward the heart of the vineyard. They walked in silence for a few minutes. Josh observed the vines stretching across the hill, the sun shining through the leaves. It was a place of serene beauty, and he could understand, in a way, why someone would want to keep it intact. Mia led him to a small, more secluded area where there was an old tree and a worn wooden bench. "This was my grandfather's favorite spot," she said, sitting on the bench and looking out over the vines. "He used to come here every afternoon, look at the grapes, and talk about how each one was unique, how each harvest was a reflection of the work and love he put into it." Josh sat next to her in silence, feeling the weight of her words. "I grew up here, you know," Mia continued, her voice softer. "While other kids at school went out to play soccer or hang out, I was here, learning about wine, about the cultivation process, about caring for the land. I complained sometimes, thinking I was missing out on childhood, but now I see that it was here that I found who I really am." Josh watched her closely, feeling the intensity of her words. "When my grandfather got sick, he passed the vineyard to me, but kept his name on the documents. I think for him, the idea that this land still belonged to his generation was important." She gave a sad smile. "And it is for me too. It's not just a property, Josh. It's my family. Every grape that grows here, every bottle of wine, carries the story of generations. I can't just sell it. It would be like selling my soul." Mia's words hit Josh deeply. He realized that her resistance wasn't stubbornness or whim, but something much greater, something he himself had never experienced. The legacy Mia carried was what gave meaning to her life, something he had never felt for his family's empire. For Josh, business had always been an obligation, something he inherited without passion, without question. "I never thought of it that way," Josh said sincerely. "For me, it was always about numbers, about goals, about results. There was never an emotional connection to what I do. Everything seems like just a transaction." Mia looked at him with curiosity, seeing vulnerability in Josh for the first time that she hadn't expected. "Maybe that's the problem," she said softly. "You're trying to buy something that doesn't have a price. And some things, Josh, can't be measured in money." Josh remained silent, absorbing her words. For the first time in a long time, he found himself questioning the path he had followed, and looking at Mia, a woman fighting to keep her family's legacy alive. He felt a mix of admiration and discomfort. Something was changing within him, and he knew that this negotiation, once purely professional, now touched something much deeper. The silence between them was interrupted by a light laugh from Mia, which took him by surprise. "What?" Josh asked, surprised. "I was just remembering you spilling that coffee on me," Mia replied, with a slight smile on her lips. "You look so lost." I think it was the first time I saw a millionaire so clumsy. Josh couldn't help but laugh. The tension eased a little, and for a moment, they shared a lightness that contrasted with the heaviness of their previous conversation. It was a memorable moment, Josh admitted, laughing at himself. "It's not every day I ruin someone's morning with such style." Mia smiled, and for a brief instant, Josh felt connected to her in an unexpected way. But soon the laughter faded, and the weight of reality returned to hover over them. "I have to go," Mia said, standing up. "But think about what we talked about, Josh. Sometimes what we're looking for isn't what we really need." Josh watched her leave, feeling that this woman and this land had planted something new within him, something he didn't yet know how to handle. But that would certainly change the course of his life. In the days following their conversation under the tree, something changed within Josh. He continued visiting the vineyard, but instead of insisting on buying the land, he began spending more time just observing and listening. Mia, initially reluctant, eventually accepted his presence, especially after he stopped talking about business and began asking genuine questions about the wine and the work at the vineyard. "So, you mean each harvest has a different flavor profile?" Josh asked, genuinely curious, as he helped Mia label some bottles in the small production room. "Yes, it depends on a lot of factors. The climate, the soil, how we care for the vines," Mia replied, with a light smile, clearly surprised by his interest. "Each harvest is like a memory of a specific year. That's why wine is so special. It tells a story." Josh held a bottle, turning it in his hands, thoughtful. That way of seeing wine, as something alive and full of meaning, was completely new to him. His entire life had been focused on goals, results, and financial success. But now, alongside Mia, he was beginning to see the value in simple things, in passion and effort for something greater than money. "I never thought it was so deep," he confessed, his eyes fixed on her hands as she skillfully worked with the bottles. "Because it was never part of your life," Mia replied, her tone light, but without judgment. "You grew up in a different world, Josh. It's not your fault. Maybe it's not my fault, but I also didn't do anything to change it." He looked at her with a sincerity that surprised her. "I always did what my father expected of me. I always followed the path laid out without questioning it. But being here with you makes me wonder if I'm on the right path." Mia stopped what she was doing and looked him in the eyes. There was something new in the way he spoke, a vulnerability she hadn't expected to find in the young millionaire heir. "And what do you think you should do?" she asked softly. Josh shrugged, feeling a bit lost. "I don't know. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now..." He shook his head with a bitter smile. "Now everything feels different." The silence between them was filled with a soft tension, a silent understanding that they were both changing. The daily coexistence, working side by side on the vineyard's small tasks, began to create a bond between them. Mia, with her determination and passion, had started to open Josh's eyes to a world he had never considered. Weeks passed, and their relationship evolved naturally. It was no longer just about business. Josh began actively helping Mia, participating in the production process, giving ideas to improve the distribution of the artisanal wine, and even suggesting strategies to expand the vineyard's reach without compromising its authenticity. Mia, initially resistant, began to see that Josh was no longer interested only in her land, but in her success, in her vision. One evening, after a long day of work in the vineyard, they sat together on the same bench under the tree where they had had their first sincere conversation. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, while the smell of ripe grapes filled the air. "I can't believe you actually got your hands dirty today," Mia said, laughing as she looked at Josh's dirt-covered hands. "Yeah, I think I surprised myself," he replied, laughing too. "Who would have thought that I, Josh Parker, would be here, helping at an artisanal vineyard?" "You adapt well," Mia said, with a gentle smile. "Maybe, over time, you'll learn to love it as much as I do." Josh was silent for a moment, looking at the horizon. There was something different about him now, something Mia couldn't quite identify, but it was palpable. "I think I've already started to love it," he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. Mia looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his declaration. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to disappear. The connection they had been building, day by day, was transforming into something more, something deeper, more real. Without thinking, Josh leaned forward and Mia, hesitant for a second, did the same. The kiss was gentle, almost shy at first, but soon it deepened, as if they both knew that this moment had been inevitable from the start. When they finally pulled away, Mia took a deep breath, her eyes still closed, while Josh watched her, his heart racing. "This shouldn't have happened," Mia murmured, but there was a soft smile on her lips. "I disagree," Josh replied without hesitation. Mia opened her eyes and smiled at him, still a little reluctant, but knowing that, somehow, this was a path they needed to take. However, as their relationship blossomed, something darker loomed. Josh had stopped talking to his father about the vineyard, avoiding Richard Parker's pressures and veiled threats to force the sale. But the silence wouldn't last forever. Days later, while Josh was helping Mia with a new harvest, his phone rang. The name Dad flashed on the screen. Josh hesitated, but he knew he couldn't avoid that conversation forever. He answered, "Josh, I've been waiting for your update for weeks. Did you close the deal?" Josh closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on him like a ton of bricks. No, I didn't close the deal." The silence on the other end of the line was so sharp that Josh could almost feel the tension rising. Richard, however, wasn't the type to lose his temper. His voice came cold and precise. "What do you mean by that?" Josh took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm not going to buy the land. I'm not going to force Mia to sell. I'm helping her expand the vineyard." Richard's response was immediate, filled with restrained anger. "You're what? Helping this woman? You're betraying your own family? I sent you there to solve a problem, not to ally yourself with the enemy." Josh felt his heart race. For the first time, he was going against his father's expectations, and he knew there would be consequences. "Dad, this isn't betrayal. It's something that makes sense to me. I don't want to be part of this purchase. The vineyard is important to her, and you what, Josh?" Richard interrupted, his voice cold and relentless. "Are you letting yourself be led by foolish feelings? Are you throwing away everything we've built because of a woman?" Josh felt anger begin to rise within him. It wasn't just about Mia. It was about him. For the first time, he was making a decision on his own, a decision that went against the Parker family empire. "Dad, you don't understand. I don't want to be like you," Josh said, his voice finally filled with conviction. "I don't want to spend my entire life chasing numbers and destroying other people's dreams. Mia, she showed me there's more to life than business. I'm doing what I think is right." The silence on the other end of the line was even heavier this time. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was full of disdain. "If you insist on this, Josh, you're out. Out of the company, out of the family. I won't allow a Parker to ruin everything we've built." Josh closed his eyes, feeling the impact of his father's words. He knew this would be the response, but hearing it still hurt. After a long silence, he spoke. "I've already made my decision. If that means I'm out, then I'm out." He hung up the phone, the weight of his choice crashing down on him. Mia, who was close enough to hear part of the conversation, approached slowly, her expression full of concern. "Josh, what happened?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but somehow also filled with a new determination. I've been disinherited." Mia watched him in silence for a few moments before stepping closer and taking his hand. "You made the right choice," she said, her voice full of gentleness and support. Josh smiled at her, feeling both relieved and scared. For the first time in his life, he had chosen his own path, and he knew that from that moment on, everything would change. In the days that followed, Josh felt as if the ground beneath his feet was giving way. The decision to break away from the Parker empire, to defy his father, weighed on his mind like a crushing burden. He was no longer the heir to a fortune. He no longer had the security of a luxurious life or the backing of his father, whose relentless presence had always guided him, even if stiflingly so. Now, Josh was on his own. The silence from his father after that last call was deafening. No messages, no words, nothing. Josh had been completely cut off from the Parker family. Finances, credit cards, privileges, all had been blocked. Josh now had to figure out how to move forward without the financial support he had always had. The shock was deep, but at the same time, there was a strange relief in knowing he had finally made a decision for himself. Mia noticed the changes in him. His shoulders, once always held high with confidence, now seemed to carry an invisible weight. His expressions, which once reflected an almost carefree serenity, now showed the doubt and uncertainty of someone questioning his own choices. "You've been quiet for days," Mia commented one night, as they both sat on the vineyard porch, looking at the vines ripening under the moonlight. Josh sighed, keeping his eyes on the horizon. "It's hard not to be. I've been disinherited, Mia." He smiled, but the smile was bitter. "I grew up with everything money could buy, always with the certainty that if I failed, my family would be there to save me. Now, I don't have that anymore." Mia, beside him, remained silent. She understood the weight of the situation, but knew there were no easy words to console him. All she could do was be present. "You know," Josh continued, his voice low, "when I made this decision, I was certain. I knew it was the right thing to do, that I needed to step away from the life my father built. But now, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake. Did I really do the right thing, giving up everything for this?" Mia turned to him, seeing the pain reflected in Josh's eyes. She understood that this wasn't just about their relationship. It was about Josh finding his own path, about breaking a cycle that had shaped his entire life. "I know I can't give you the answers you're looking for," Mia said carefully, "but I can tell you what I see. And what I see is someone who's finally trying to live his own life. It might be scary now, but you've already felt the weight lift off your shoulders. And that is priceless." Josh looked at her for a moment, his eyes filled with an internal storm. He wanted to believe Mia's words, wanted to trust that there was something greater ahead, but the fear of having taken the wrong step still haunted him. He had gone from a millionaire heir to a man with nothing but his determination to help Mia keep the vineyard alive. "What about the vineyard?" Josh asked, changing the focus. "We're about to enter a crucial harvest. If the crop isn't good, we'll be in trouble." Mia nodded, her expression serious as well. The truth was that even with all the passion and love she put into the vineyard, times were tough. Producing artisanal wine was expensive, and profit margins were small. With the growing competition in the wine industry, especially with large corporations dominating the market, keeping the vineyard alive was a constant struggle. "We'll figure it out," Mia said firmly. "This land has been through tough times before. My grandfather always said the strongest vines grow in the harshest conditions. I think that applies to us too." Her confidence was an anchor for Josh. Even though everything around him seemed uncertain, Mia remained steady. Her dedication and passion for the vineyard were unwavering. Seeing how she committed to every detail, from caring for the grapes to delivering the bottles, made Josh question even more what really mattered in life. In the following months, Josh fully immersed himself in the vineyard's work. He learned about the soil, the grapes, the fermentation process, and even participated in local events to promote the artisanal wine that Mia and her family produced. They began planning how they could expand production, perhaps sell to other states, and increase distribution, without losing the artisanal essence of the business. However, financial challenges began to take their toll. The vineyard wasn't generating enough profit to cover all the growing expenses. Josh started to realize how difficult it would be to keep everything running. The pressure was mounting, but he didn't want to admit it to Mia. One night, after a long meeting with potential investors, Josh was sitting alone in Mia's living room. She entered, watching him in silence for a few moments before sitting beside him. "You're worried about the finances, aren't you?" she asked bluntly. Josh sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just that," he replied, exhausted. "I feel like I'm letting you down. I promised to help, and so far, all I've done is bring more complications. Being with you, Mia, is the best thing that's ever happened to me, but the weight of keeping this vineyard running is enormous. I don't know if I'm strong enough for it." Mia took his hand and squeezed it gently. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. "This vineyard isn't just mine. It's ours now. I know things are tough, but we'll get through it together. It's not about who carries more weight, but about how we support each other." Josh felt the knot in his chest loosen a little. Mia's unconditional support, her ability to face challenges with courage and determination, was everything he needed at that moment. Still, The doubt lingered. Josh began, but his voice faltered. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I don't know if I made the right choice, Mia. Sometimes, all of this feels impossible. Mia looked deeply into his eyes, seeing the internal battle he was fighting. We're in this together, Josh. No matter how hard it gets, you made the right choice. And I'm with you, always. In that moment, Josh felt that, despite everything, there might be hope. The rejection from his father and the weight of leaving his old life still haunted him. But Mia's love and support gave him the strength to keep going. However, the world of artisanal wine business wasn't easy. Amid demanding investors, fierce competition, and the constant need to prove themselves, Josh and Mia faced daily battles to keep the vineyard afloat. Every decision felt like a tightrope walk between success and failure. And even with the love that united them, they both knew the road ahead would be arduous. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting with a local distributor who had rejected a new order, Josh found himself alone in the vineyard, walking slowly among the grapes. He knelt, picking up a handful of soil in his hand, letting it run through his fingers. The feeling was strange. He, who had always been a numbers man, now found himself seeking solace in the earth, trying to connect with something deeper. Then Mia appeared, walking toward him, her expression serene but also tired. It's not going to be easy, she said, sitting down next to him. I know, Josh replied, his voice low. But if we keep fighting together, we'll make it. She smiled at him, and in that moment, he knew that despite all the uncertainties, he was no longer alone. Autumn had arrived in Napa Valley, bringing with it a sense of renewal for Josh and Mia. After months of effort, struggles, and uncertainties, the vineyard finally seemed to be on a good path. The wine produced that year had received good regional reviews, and the Thompson Vineyard name was starting to gain recognition beyond the town. Josh, though still bearing the scars of his break with his family, was beginning to feel more comfortable in the new life he had chosen. Beside Mia, he found purpose in each day of work, in each new discovery about wine, and especially in the passion that united them. However, as is common in life, moments of calm are often interrupted by unexpected storms. Something's wrong, Mia murmured one morning as she looked at one of the oldest vines on the property. The vine leaves were pale, some already beginning to wither, and the grape clusters looked smaller than usual. Josh, who was beside her, frowned as he noticed the same. It must be a small variation, right? Josh suggested, trying to push away the fear that was beginning to grow inside him. No, this isn't normal, Mia replied, her voice low and worried. This is more than just a simple climate variation. Something is wrong. In the following days, the situation worsened. The leaves began falling at an alarming rate. The grapes that were about to ripen started rotting, and Mia finally knew what they were facing. A larval infestation in the roots of the vines. Larvae, Mia explained to Josh, her voice almost a whisper, as if saying the word would make it even more real. They're attacking the roots. If we don't control it now, we'll lose the entire harvest. Maybe even more than that. Josh felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what that meant. It wasn't just a threat for that year, but for the vineyard's future. And worst of all, they didn't have the financial resources or time for a conventional solution. How can we fight this? He asked, trying to stay calm, but his voice betrayed the anxiety he felt. Mia shook her head, desperate. There are pesticides that could help, but besides being extremely expensive, they'd compromise the quality of the wine. The vineyard would lose its essence, not to mention the environmental impact. My grandfather was always against using chemicals. He believed the land gives back what we put into it. Josh looked at the vines, feeling the weight of his choice. He had left behind the life he knew to be there, beside Mia, investing in something he was beginning to deeply believe in. But now, the future seemed threatened. It was hard not to question whether all of this had been a mistake. We can't let this destroy what we built, Josh said, his voice more determined now, though his heart was still full of doubt. We won't, Mia replied, holding his hand firmly. "We'll find a solution. Somehow." The following days were a race against time. Josh and Mia dove into research, trying to find more sustainable and natural methods to fight the infestation. They consulted old books from the local library, sought help online, and talked to specialists, but the answers weren't promising. The larvae continued to spread, and the year's harvest already seemed compromised. "We don't have much time," Josh murmured one night as he reviewed yet another scientific article on agricultural pests. Exhaustion was taking over his body, but he refused to stop. "Let's talk to our neighbors," Mia suddenly suggested, her voice breaking the tense silence of the room. "Maybe they've faced something similar before. The small producers here always help each other. Maybe they know something we're not seeing." Josh looked at her, surprised by the idea. "Makes sense," he agreed, immediately standing up. "We have nothing to lose." The next morning, Josh and Mia began visiting the neighboring vineyards. Some producers were already aware of the infestation and were also concerned. There was a growing fear that the plague could spread throughout the region, devastating other vineyards and compromising Napa Valley's future. However, during one of the visits, an older local producer named Hank brought unexpected hope. "You don't need pesticides," said Hank, an elderly man with experienced eyes. "Back in the 70s, my family faced something similar. The larvae were devastating the vines, and most producers turned to chemicals. But my father, he took a different path." "What did he do?" Mia asked eagerly. Hank smiled with a quiet wisdom. "He used an old method he learned from my grandfather. Herbal teas and natural compounds made from the leaves of certain plants that grow around here. It's slow, but it works. It preserves the land and heals the vines without poisoning the soil. But you'll need patience." Josh and Mia exchanged hopeful glances. "Where do we find these plants?" Josh asked, already mentally preparing to put the idea into practice. "They grow in the fields up north, near the hills. I can show you. But remember, it's not an instant solution. You'll have to be persistent and careful." Without hesitation, Josh and Mia followed Hank's instructions. They went to the hills, gathered the indicated leaves, and, with Hank's help and that of other small producers, prepared the mixture. It was labor-intensive, involving time and dedication, but for them, it was the only way out. In the weeks that followed, they applied the compound to all the affected vines. The days were long, and the nights were filled with worry. But slowly, they began to see results. The vines that had been most affected started to recover. The leaves regained their color, and the remaining grapes, still small, seemed to resume their growth. "We're making it," Mia said, with a tired but hopeful smile. Josh, beside her, couldn't contain his relief. After weeks of despair and uncertainty, there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. More than that, the crisis had brought Josh and Mia even closer to the local community. Other small producers, who were also being affected by the plague, began applying the same method, and soon, the natural solution they found spread throughout the region. Over time, the vineyard not only survived the crisis, but also became an example of resilience and innovation. Josh and Mia's work to combat the plague without compromising the wine's quality caught the attention of the local press, and their story quickly gained notoriety. Who would have thought an herbal tea would save everything? Josh joked, as Mia laughed, still holding a freshly produced bottle of wine. "My grandfather would be proud," Mia replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "He always said the land gives back what we put into it." Josh looked at Mia, feeling a deep pride for what they had built together. The vineyard was no longer just a piece of land. It was a symbol of everything they had overcome, of all the tough choices they made, and of how, despite everything, they remained united. Their partnership, both in work and in their personal lives, had solidified in a way Josh had never imagined. He had freed himself from the weight of his old life, from his father's control, and found a new purpose beside the woman he loved. Now, Josh knew that together, they could face any challenge that came their way. The Thompson Vineyard had become a reference in sustainable production in Napa Valley, and Josh, alongside Mia, was an example for other producers of how to preserve the legacy of the land without sacrificing the essence of the business. With the success of the vineyard emerging after the devastating crisis, Josh and Mia began to feel the impact of their efforts. The wine they produced, the result of the vineyard's recovery, and the hard work during the infestation, started attracting the attention of small merchants and wine experts in the region. Praise arrived quickly, and orders began to increase. Soon, they were invited to participate in wine competitions, something Mia had only dreamed of in the past. "Can you believe this?" Mia said, her eyes shining as she held the invitation to a prestigious wine competition in California. "We're going to present our wine at a national competition, Josh." Josh, who was checking the latest bottle deliveries for a new restaurant that had contracted them, looked at her with a satisfied smile. He walked over, took the invitation from her hands, and gave it a look. "We did this together," he said softly, with a hint of pride and emotion in his voice. "This is just the beginning, Mia." She smiled, emotional. After everything they had been through, the challenges, the fear of losing the vineyard, the uncertainty about the future, that invitation felt like validation that every drop of sweat had been worth it. But more than that, for Mia, it was a reaffirmation of her family's legacy. And for Josh, it was proof that he could succeed outside his father's shadow, with something built by his own hands. The tasting event, which would take place in a few months, became their main focus. They knew this was their chance to show the world the value of the artisanal wine they produced. As the competition day approached, recognition of Thompson Vineyard's wine began to spread, not only in Napa but throughout California. Small articles started appearing in blogs and specialized magazines, highlighting the sustainable production and the story behind the vineyard, especially the turnaround caused by the larval infestation and how Josh and Mia had faced the challenge innovatively. However, with success also came exposure. The story of the vineyard of Mia and Josh now became part of a narrative that spread, and this inevitably caught the attention of someone Josh was trying to forget: his father, Richard Parker. Richard Parker was a man used to controlling everything around him. Success was something he expected, not admired. When Josh had broken with the family, Richard hadn't hesitated to disinherit him. In Richard's mind, it was only a matter of time before Josh realized his mistake and came back. But that never happened. One afternoon in his home office, Richard was flipping through a wine magazine that had arrived in the mail. He didn't usually read this type of publication, but something caught his attention. Turning a page, he came across a feature article: "The Rebirth of Thompson Vineyard: How a Family Vineyard Overcame a Plague and Emerged as a New Icon of Sustainable Wine." And there, in one of the photos, was his son, Josh, next to Mia, holding a wine glass and smiling. The impact was immediate. "What is this?" Richard muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the photo. He read the entire article with a mix of disbelief and anger. Not only had Josh given up on following the path of Parker Resorts, but he was also thriving outside the family empire, in a field Richard had never considered relevant. The tension grew within him. His son, whom he thought would return repentant, was now gaining recognition for his own business, something Richard couldn't control. He threw the magazine onto the desk forcefully, the sound echoing through the empty office. The betrayal he felt was almost physical. The pride he always believed Josh should have for the family had been replaced by independence. But curiosity consumed him. Without telling anyone, Richard did something he would never admit to himself. He got in his car and drove to Napa Valley. The idea of being there, in the world of wine, was strange to him. Still, there was something he needed to see for himself. He needed to understand what had drawn Josh to that place, and above all, prove that it wasn't real. Upon arriving at the vineyard, Richard didn't announce himself. He observed from afar, watching the workers move around, the environment so different from what he was used to. It wasn't grand, but there was something undeniably beautiful about that setting. and in the distance he saw his son Josh talking to Mia near one of the wine barrels. "This batch is perfect," Josh said as he checked the barrels with Mia. "I think we have a good chance at the competition." "I agree," Mia smiled, wiping her dirt-stained hands on her pants. "If we get a good ranking, it'll open even more doors for us." As they spoke, Josh felt a presence behind him. When he turned around, he was paralyzed. There, standing a few meters away, was his father. "Dad!" The word came out as a whisper. The shock was evident on Josh's face. Mia, sensing the immediate tension, stepped back slightly, feeling that this was a moment between father and son. "Josh," Richard said, his voice firm but without its usual harshness. He looked around, taking in the vineyard surroundings. "I came to see for myself." Josh was lost in a whirlwind of emotions. Part of him wanted to confront his father immediately, to ask why he had come, what he intended. But another part, the part that still longed for approval, simply watched him in silence. "I didn't expect to see you here," Josh finally said, trying to control his tone. "And I didn't expect to see this," Richard replied, with a hint of irony. "Wine, Josh? This is what you chose." Josh felt the old defensive instinct rise, but he suppressed it. He knew he no longer needed to justify his choices to his father. "Yes, Dad, this is what I chose," he said firmly but without anger. "I chose to build something for myself, something I believe in, and we made it, Mia and I. We're making this work." Richard looked at Josh, his eyes evaluating every word. Finally, he broke the silence. "I heard the wine is good," he said dryly. Josh hesitated, surprised by the comment. He expected nothing but criticism from his father. "Would you like to try it?" Josh asked, his voice softer now, unsure of what to expect. Richard looked at him for a moment before nodding, without saying a word. Mia, who had been watching from afar, stepped forward and took a bottle of the award-winning vintage. She poured a glass and handed it to Richard. "This is the wine that carried our story forward," Mia said softly. Richard took the glass and sipped, his eyes never leaving Josh's. He said nothing for a few moments, but his expression subtly changed. It was almost imperceptible, but there was something new there, a recognition, perhaps. "It's good," Richard admitted finally. That simple phrase hit Josh in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just approval of the wine. It was recognition that Josh had accomplished something on his own, without his father's controlling hand. "I thought you'd come back," Richard said after a long silence. "I thought that sooner or later, you'd realize the mistake you were making and return to the family. But now, I see I was wrong." Josh took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his father's words. "Dad, I didn't do this to prove anything to you," Josh said calmly. "I did this because I found something that made me feel complete. Something that's mine. And it doesn't matter if you never understand that, because I know I made the right choice." Richard looked at his son with an expression that was hard to decipher. It was as if he were seeing Josh for the first time, not as the son he had molded to follow in his footsteps, but as a man who had found his own way. "Maybe," Richard said, looking at the wine in his glass, "maybe you made the right choice after all." Without another word, Richard placed a glass on the table and, with one last look at Josh, turned and left, leaving his son standing there, processing everything that had happened. Mia approached slowly, placing a hand on Josh's shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and full of concern. Josh didn't respond immediately. He still felt the impact of what had just happened. Finally, he looked at Mia and smiled lightly. "I think I am," he said. "For the first time, I think I really am." The sound of the phone echoed through the small vineyard room. Josh and Mia, exhausted after a long day of work, exchanged confused glances. It was late, and they rarely received calls so late at the vineyard. Mia, still wiping her dirt-stained hands on a cloth, answered. "Thompson Vineyard, good evening." On the other end of the line, a formal and polite voice introduced itself. "Good evening. My name is Harrison. I'm the Director of Operations at Parker Resorts. I'm calling to make a special request for our new restaurants in our resort network. We'd like to include Thompson Vineyard wines in our exclusive menu. Mia, upon hearing Parker Resorts, froze for a moment. She quickly looked at Josh, who noticed a sudden change in her expression. He already knew what was happening. Sorry, could you repeat that? Mia asked, trying to buy time as she processed the information. Yes, of course, the man replied kindly. We're interested in placing a significant order to supply our luxury resorts. We know your wine is receiving excellent recognition, and we think it would be a valuable addition to our menu. Mia, still in disbelief, covered the phone's mouthpiece and looked at Josh, her eyebrows raised. Josh, it's your family's resort chain. They want to buy our wine. Josh stepped closer, carefully taking the phone. The name Parker Resorts always carried weight for him, but now, at that moment, it felt almost surreal. This is Josh Parker, he finally said, with a mix of surprise and seriousness. I'm listening. Harrison seemed to hesitate for a second, but soon continued. Mr. Parker, we are aware of your connection to the vineyard, and the request was made with your father's full knowledge. He's interested in starting a new partnership with you. Could we schedule a meeting to discuss the details? Josh was silent for a moment, taking it all in. He never expected his family to make such an approach, especially on his father's initiative. He looked at Mia, who was watching him with a mix of concern and curiosity. Sure, he replied after a long sigh. We can schedule a conversation, but I need some time to think about it. Hanging up the phone, Josh stood in silence for a few moments, the weight of that call falling on him like a sudden storm. What do you think this means? Mia asked softly, placing her hand on his shoulder. Josh shook his head, still processing. I don't know, Mia, but somehow I feel like my dad is trying to reconnect. Hours passed until the phone rang again, this time with an even more direct message. Richard Parker had scheduled a lunch for the next day. Josh knew that meeting would be crucial. The next morning, Josh drove to the luxurious restaurant where his father had arranged the meeting. The place was sophisticated, classic, the kind of setting where Richard Parker felt comfortable. Upon entering, Josh spotted his father sitting at a table in the back, looking unperturbed but with a thoughtful expression he rarely saw. Richard stood up as soon as Josh approached, and although the gesture was formal, there was a slight hesitation in his movements, as if even that small act was an effort to maintain composure. Josh, he greeted, his voice softer than usual. Dad, Josh replied, taking his seat at the table. The silence that followed was heavy, full of unspoken words, repressed emotions, and years of a relationship marked by unmet expectations. Finally, it was Richard who broke the ice. He began, looking at the glass of water in front of him before raising his eyes to his son. I think I've made a lot of mistakes, Josh. Josh didn't respond immediately, allowing his father to continue. When you went to Napa, I thought it was a phase. I thought you'd soon realize your life was here, in the legacy I built. Richard sighed, his tone more human than Josh remembered. But you built something of your own, something that... He hesitated for a second, as if the words were difficult to say. Something I'm proud of. Josh felt his chest tighten. It was rare to hear his father express any kind of vulnerability, or let alone pride. It caught him off guard. I know I was hard on you. I forced you to choose between the family and what you loved, Richard continued. And I see now that I was wrong. It should never have been a choice. Josh looked at his father, the weight of the words resonating within him. Part of him was still guarded, waiting for the rigid man he had always known. But what he saw in front of him was a different man. Older, perhaps a bit tired, but willing to admit his mistakes, something he never imagined witnessing. I'm not going to ask you to come back and leave everything you've built, Richard said, straightening in his chair. But I want you to know that when I die, you'll still be the heir to everything we have. I don't expect you to take over as president, but I'd like you to be part of the board, even from afar. The company needs you, someone with an independent vision. I don't want everything to fall apart when I'm no longer here. Josh felt a lump in his throat. This was the first time his father had spoken about his own death so frankly, so directly. For the first time, Richard seemed willing to let go of the control he had always held so tightly. "Dad," Josh began, his voice low and hesitant. "I never wanted to compete with you. I never wanted it to be me against the family. But I had to find my own way. I couldn't just be Richard Parker's son." Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on Josh's. "I know that now," he admitted, with a regret that seemed deeply rooted. "I just hope that, somehow, we can find a middle ground, that you can be part of the family, even with your own life, your own choices." Josh took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I appreciate that, Dad. Truly," he said calmly. "But my life now is here, with Mia, with the vineyard we've built together. I can't go back and be part of a world that isn't mine anymore. I forgive you, but I need you to understand that my priority is the life I'm building, with or without Parker Resorts." Richard was silent for a long moment, absorbing his son's words. He looked older, more tired, but also somehow more human. "I understand," Richard finally said with a resigned sigh. "I just want you to know that when the time comes, the company will be yours, in your own way. You're the only heir. Just think about it." Josh nodded. There was peace in that moment, even though there was much to heal. He knew that, finally, his father accepted who he had become. It might never be a perfect relationship, but there was a chance for redemption. That night, back at the vineyard, Mia was waiting for him. She knew the meeting with his father had been a milestone for Josh, and when he entered, his expression said it all. "How did it go?" she asked softly. Josh smiled lightly, exhausted but relieved. "It was hard but good. I think, for the first time, he really listened to me." He walked over to her and wrapped her in a tight hug. "I forgave him, Mia, but I also made it clear that my life is here, with you." She held him tightly, feeling the relief in every word. "I'm proud of you, Josh," she said tenderly. "We made this happen together." That night, they organized a small celebration at the vineyard with the workers and neighbors. The air was filled with laughter, soft music, and the aroma of ripe grapes. Josh looked around, feeling the warmth of the community they had built, the shared happiness among everyone who helped keep the vineyard alive. As the sun set over the Napa Hills, bathing the vineyard in golden hues, Josh held Mia's hand, and they exchanged a look full of love and complicity. It was proof that, despite everything, they had built something real and lasting. The celebration continued, with laughter and toast to the vineyard's success. But for Josh, the real toast was to the life he had finally chosen, by Mia's side, in the place he could now call home. This story teaches us some profound lessons, and we can apply them in our daily lives with simple exercises that help internalize these learnings. The first lesson that Josh's story teaches us is the importance of following our own path, even when it means going against others' expectations, even those of our family. Josh chose to leave behind the empire his father built to find his own fulfillment alongside Mia and the vineyard. He faced rejection, but found something more valuable: the satisfaction of creating an authentic life. In our daily lives, we can practice this lesson by dedicating time to reflect on what truly makes us happy and fulfilled. A practical exercise is to create a passion journal, where you spend 15 minutes a day writing about activities that bring you joy and purpose. List what you would do if there were no external pressure. This helps you recognize what is truly important to you, just as Josh did when he chose a vineyard and his love for Mia. The second lesson is about the power of resilience in times of crisis. When the vineyard was devastated by the plague, Josh and Mia didn't give up. Instead, they sought sustainable solutions with the help of the community. This example shows that even when circumstances seem insurmountable, resilience and cooperation can help us overcome challenges. In our daily lives, we can practice this lesson with the exercise of solving problems together. Whenever you face a problem, Instead of trying to solve it alone, invite someone to brainstorm solutions with you. This not only strengthens the spirit of collaboration, but also helps you find new approaches, just as Josh and Mia did by relying on their neighbors. Finally, the story teaches us about the value of reconciliation and forgiveness. When Josh's father sought reconciliation, admitting his mistakes, Josh found the strength to forgive him, even if he didn't return to the life his father expected. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the problems of the past, but allowing healing for both. We can practice this lesson in our daily lives with the exercise of forgiveness self-reflection. Take a moment to think of someone with whom you have a complicated relationship and reflect on how forgiveness, even if it doesn't lead to complete reconciliation, can bring you peace. The act of forgiving can free you from the emotional burden you carry, just as it did for Josh, allowing him to move forward with his life alongside Mia. These 3 lessons, following your own path, practicing resilience, and seeking forgiveness, are powerful tools for leading a more authentic, fulfilling, and peaceful life.